Hello, Doomers and Doomettes, I'm your host Dee, and I have an axe to grind with cinematic universes. And I don't think I'm alone. With the Marvel Cinematic Universe on the decline, and recent films like The Flash bombing at the box office, I think it's fair to say that general audiences are getting sick of the trend. Many people will complain that movies hardly feel like isolated stories, but instead some spoiled blend of throwaway cameos, sequel baiting, and open-ended tales that are too afraid to make any real changes to the main characters. What started as a fun reason to stay after the credits to receive a little surprise has turned into an onslaught on the senses, full of character baiting, rush productions, poor payoffs, and more galore. It's really crazy in a way. Imagine telling someone in the year 2005 we'd be seeing several comic book universes unfolding on the big screen, but it's got the payoff of a wish on a monkey's paw. But just before we begin the topic today, I just want to give a shout out to our channel partner, TransWarp Toys. If you're an action figure collector and spend your money on various forms of plastic, then you know how hard it is to track down the latest releases. But we got you covered at TransWarp Toys, with figures ranging from Transformers, G.I. Joe, Marvel, and many more. Use the promo code DOOMERDEN for 5% off your first order, and any order over $100 qualifies for free shipping in the United States. And as always, if you're new to the channel, I'd like to humbly ask for you to consider liking the video, or even subscribing if you want to see more content like this, as it really helps grow the channel in the algorithm. And if you're a returning subscriber, thanks for coming back. With that said, sit back, relax, and let's complain about the state of modern cinematic universes.
God! We have to just go with this plan. We don't even have one movie yet. You go with the plan. Maybe we'll just go and do our own franchise. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you want Civil War? Is that what you want? Yeah, dude, it's Civil War. F you. F you. Get out of my house. We'll make way more money on our franchise. Go ahead. I bet you don't even get halfway through phase 1 on your franchise, DC Comics.
Let me set the stage by winding the clocks back a bit and start with a bit of a recap of how we ended where we are today. It is the year 2008. The state of cinema is booming. With the revitalization of the summer blockbuster from years before and the growing popularity of superhero films, a risk was taken in the form of Jon Favreau's Iron Man. While I wouldn't call the character obscure personally, he used to have a TV show after all, it was a risk in the sense that he was a new character on the silver screen, and not someone who had an established box office draw like Spider-Man or Batman. Marvel had even been shopping around to try to get a studio to pick up the rights to it, and after it changed hands several times, it eventually reverted back to Marvel, and they basically decided that this time they would do it themselves. The project turned out to be widely successful, earning close to $600 million at the box office, achieving critical acclaim as well as financial success. But there was one scene that could be argued to have overshadowed the entire film, and had people talking for months to come on what could be expected next.
Who the hell are you? Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Oh. I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
Now, it's important to note that Iron Man did not create the end credits stinger. It existed for several decades at that point, and was used both comedically in films as well as a way to tease upcoming projects. So no, it wasn't exactly a new innovation. What was new, however, was the sheer scope of the implication of it. This wasn't just teasing an Avengers film, it was teasing the potential of several other individual superhero movies, and an entire universe beyond that film. There have been teases in superhero movies before, yet they came across more so as cameos, little nods that the fans would get, not something that would actually be expanded upon.
What are we gonna call this guy?
Dr. Octopus.
That's crap.
Science Squid?
Crap.
Doctor Strange.
That's pretty good. But it's taken.
But here, it was different, and Kevin Feige saw an opportunity to create a shared universe of projects. The film rights for the most popular Marvel characters at the time, Spider-Man and the X-Men, were already held by other studios at that point, but Feige realized they still had the rights to the most of the core members of the Avengers cast, and set out to develop that roster. Shortly after the success of Iron Man, a sequel, films for Captain America, Thor, as well as the Avengers as a film were announced. Each film featured several different creative crews, differing writers and directors, but they all had one major goal: introduce the Avengers. And with the release of that film, it consisted of accumulation of everything that had come before. The characters had all met up, and they had a great big showdown against a CGI horde army. And that was phase 1 of the MCU. And honestly, I think that was pretty good for what it was. Sure, some of the films were better than others, but it had a very clear focus and an obvious endpoint for that saga. But I think it's right here where we encountered our first problem with the modern day cinematic universes: the emergence of the copycats. With the Avengers reaching over $1 billion at the box office, this is approximately when everyone else started putting in time and effort to get their cinematic universe off the ground, and they came in with mixed results, to say the least. As the Marvel films entered the second phase, DC fired back with the unveiling of 2013's Man of Steel, a polarizing take on Superman, with a confirmation from Comic-Con that Superman would be facing off against a new version of Batman in the sequel. Sony, turning green with envy as they watched the Marvel film catalog explode, began to work on projects for a new Spider-Man universe, with films not just based around the titular character, but expanding off into multiple projects based on his villains and side characters, just to get a piece of the pie. 2012's Amazing Spider-Man had already been set to release after the Avengers, but by the time the sequel came out, it was full of future film baiting, promising projects based on the Sinister Six, Venom, Black Cat, and various other ideas, some of which we are seeing the fruits of today. As this was going on, Marvel was honestly beginning to struggle a bit as well, and not in a financial sense. They were clearly very well off at the moment, but rather from a creative standpoint. Because honestly, at this time, while it may not have appeared so from the perspective of the audience, behind-the-scenes information confirms that they didn't really know where to take the story from here at first. Thanos, the intended big bad of the series, shows up at the end of the first Avengers film, but there really wasn't a larger plan just yet in 2012. In fact, interviews confirm that Marvel didn't even consider using the Infinity Stones at this point in time as a story concept. James Gunn later confirmed that it was only during his first draft for Guardians of the Galaxy that Marvel decided to move forward in using the stones, and Gunn added backstory for them in only an hour and a half. From here, it was retroactively declared that Loki's staff and the Tesseract, both used in the Avengers movie, were actually Infinity Stones. Now look, I may not be the biggest MCU fan, but this isn't intended to be a total breakdown of that model. But this goes to show that individuals like Kevin Feige were not actually pre-planning out a whole lot, and were just trying to throw stuff at the wall and see what stuck. And every once in a while, individuals like the Russo brothers may come along to make some sense of things, but they're the result of people like Feige throwing a huge net out and trying to reel in whatever they can catch. In fact, it's very interesting how many projects aren't as planned out as you might think. A good example being what Disney did to the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Now I know sequels have been talked to death, but let's revisit some of that for a brief moment. Back in 2012, when George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, he had also included an outline of his vision for the sequel trilogy. Now, not a whole lot is known about this, and honestly, that whole topic can be a video in and of itself, but what we do know is that the treatment was read by a few higher-ups at Disney and promptly brushed aside as they believed that they had a handle on things. And instead, they brought in J.J. Abrams and his absurd mystery box obsession.
You can trade it all in for what's in this box.
The box! The box!
Seriously, JJ's lack of understanding of the concept of the mystery box is astounding for how much he talks about it, but that's also a topic for another day. But what happens from here is history. JJ launches The Force Awakens, a massive box office success and a worldwide sensation, with a ton of unexplained plot hooks and sequel bait, as Disney promised to launch a whole slew of upcoming projects. And then JJ handed over the keys to Rian Johnson, who had a completely different idea for where he wanted to take things. Down the gutter, apparently. The point being, Disney, trying to set up another massive, expansive, cinematic onslaught of films, was okay with directors winging it from project to project, without so much of a sticky note of ideas. And well, we all know how the sequel trilogy goes from there.
Somehow Palpatine returned. Well, this sucks.
By this point in 2017, things really started to get out of control. DC desperately starts to play catch-up after the underperforming Suicide Squad and highly criticized Justice League film. Paramount begins to work on pitches for 9 potential Transformer movie spin-offs, the Godzilla series got a bit more momentum with Skull Island, and Universal was getting a bit crazy as they thought they could launch a dark universe. A series of monster films all set together, starting with The Mummy starring Tom Cruise. All the while, Sony was clearly trying to do something with the Spider-Man brands it had left and began a Venom project. It really was a wild time. Sure, Avengers Infinity War and Endgame came out to near unanimous praise, but with the benefit of hindsight, you could really see how different things ended up as a result of the clever rearranging of elements from the Russo brothers rather than deliberate plans from the start. So the question is then raised, why don't studios plan out things more? Why don't they actually try to set longer-term goals for these projects instead of just announcing this slog of films? The answer honestly is pretty simple. control. Although planning out a story would allow for control in the long run, it doesn't allow the bigwig studio executives the sort of reactionary control that they want over projects. I think a good example of this in action would be the fall of the DCEU. The DCEU clearly started with Zack Snyder's vision for the series in mind, as he seemed to be spearheading the artistic direction with both Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman. And regardless of your thoughts on Batman vs Superman, there were several elements intended to set up longer-term projects, most notably the time travel and nightmare sequences. Though, if you ask me, Flash maybe should have used his time travel abilities to warn Batman about Ezra Miller. But Batman vs Superman did the first thing that many other failed cinematic universes tried to do: rush in as many potential sequel hooks in one film without taking the time to build anything. Amazing Spider-Man did the exact same thing. However, as we know, Batman vs Superman received very mixed receptions, enough that made Warner Brothers hastily reshoot and edit significant parts of the next upcoming project, Suicide Squad, which reportedly went from a far more dark and gritty direction, in line with the previous Batman vs Superman, to a very Marvel-esque and upbeat film, something easily merchandisable as it flooded countless hot topics in 2016. As a result, Suicide Squad turned into a muddled mess of clashing themes, odd character interactions, and inconsistent tones. And there are so many more moments that seem like they were just quickly added in to lighten things up at the last moment, almost in a knee-jerk reaction to the complaints that Batman vs Superman was too grim. And so, when it came time for Justice League, following a tragedy in Zack Snyder's life with the loss of his daughter, post-production of the film fell to Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon, of course, added several elements of MCU-style quipping and bright colors, completely clashing with Zack Snyder's original vision.
Do you really think that...
Oh, wow, they really just vanish. Huh? Oh, that's rude.
And we know how this story goes from here. People campaigned for the Snyder Cut, and it turned out to be an immensely better film. But the reason Warner Brothers didn't want to have it released was because it would be an admission of failure on the part of the executives. An admission that their desperate chasing of trends was a mistake, which of course was something they really didn't want to do. A similar thing could be going on with the Transformer films, as despite all evidence to the contrary, producer Lorenzo di Bonaventura still refuses to call the new film series a reboot, even against the desires of the directors, insisting it still fits in with a vision of the Michael Bay series, which frankly is impossible. It should really come as no surprise that the studio executives can be really pompous types who think they're always in the right and refuse to change course until everything is completely crashing around them. And honestly, I think that's the point we've reached. Disney is insistent on expanding the bloated carcasses of things like Star Wars and Marvel with countless new projects with increasingly diminishing returns, as they hold ideals and messages general audiences just aren't resonating with anymore. Warner Brothers is changing course with a sinking ship, putting immense effort into flopping projects, desperately trying to re-energize their brands. And all of this is while abuse in the industry is getting worse than ever. Current strikes aside, there's even more going on in the animation room. Have you seen projects like Ant-Man 3 and The Flash and felt like CGI was worse than prior films, like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man series from the mid-2000s? The technology should be advancing, but CGI is almost looking worse than it's ever been. Well, the reason for this is reportedly that studios and directors are extremely punishing on animators, forcing countless revisions based on reshoots and course corrections. But the problem is you can't just redo a scene in a week. Animation takes an incredible amount of calculated time and effort, and studios, based on this knee-jerk reaction style of producing, are pushing harder and harder hours on the crew. And when the film inevitably flops as a result of this, well, no one is happy. Honestly, compiling all this together, I think these are the reasons why cinematic universes don't work in the long run. Studio executives are only interested in the big project aspect because they think it makes them money without understanding why it makes money. People like big stories, people like getting invested with engaging character dynamics, not simply just keeping up with things because they're available to catch up with. Sequel baiting for the sake of sequel baiting won't get you anywhere unless people are actively invested in the project. And frankly, studios seem more interested in promising people the thing they want to see later on rather than giving it to them in the present day. It's like studio executives handing you an IOU. So what could be done at this point? Can these brands be saved? Yeah, certainly, but studios won't like the answer. It's simple. Take a break. There's such a glut of overproduced content that I'd say it's comparable to the video game crash of the 1980s, when people just realized that most of the projects are not really worth their time. The best thing to do is fall back a bit, let things calm down, and then bring back these projects maybe 10 years later. It worked incredibly well with Star Wars, not just just once, but twice with The Phantom Menace and The Force Awakens. Use that time to start looking for people who actually have a creative vision for the story and let them run the ship a little bit. Don't just let the directorial positions be a revolving door taking whoever will fill the slot, understanding that these types of stories need direction and vision. It's okay to take time to make a film, and stop with the crunch time, otherwise the animators are going to unionize and go on strike and then you really won't have anything left. But the unfortunate truth is that's unlikely to happen anytime soon, as studios are getting more and more desperate for cash flow. In fact, Disney is headed straight for some really turbulent times in the near future. You see, when Disney purchased Fox for $71.3 billion, it gave them majority ownership of the streaming service Hulu. But this triggered a clause in a Hulu contract, as with majority ownership, Disney is going to be forced to buy out NBC Universal of their shares in January of 2024. A cost like this could be anywhere between $9 billion and $30 billion depending on market close at the time of the sale. And with several Marvel flops, declining Disney Plus subscriptions, plummeting theme park ticket sales, and more, Disney really might be in some trouble for putting so much weight into cinematic universes. Yeah, there's a reason that rumors are floating around that Disney wants to get purchased by Apple. As for what I recommend doing, as much as I love cinema, I'm honestly getting way more enjoyment this year out of the Skibbity Toilet series made by a single YouTube content creator, rather than any multi-million-dollar project this year. Really, I think I'm more invested in this, if anything, at this point. The escalation of conflict is insane, and at this point more interesting than anything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave! With a box of scraps!
And so that's how I feel about cinematic universes at the moment. Are you tired of this film trend, and what do you think film studios should do next? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, I humbly request that you consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. Or if you want to give suggestions for future videos, feel free to join in our Discord, linked in the description below. I'm working on the Johan entry in the Did Nothing Wrong series, but that one may be very involved, so I have just one more video to put up before that gets uploaded. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.